Good to go, right?
Yes, yes.
All right. So, hello everyone. Welcome to MuleSoft Mysore Group. So today we have the topic platform configuration on CloudHub 2.0. So we have Vijay with us. Um, yeah. So before we continue with the presentation, I will read out some safe harbor statement. Like both the speaker and the host are organizing this meetup in individual capacity only. We are not representing our companies here, and this presentation is strictly for learning purpose only and not meant for any promotional activities. Housekeeping rules, like we are recording this meetup and we will be uploading this on our YouTube page and on the meetup page, so you can just revisit and rewatch it. Questions you can ask at any time in the chat. Feel free to use your mic and ask question directly, okay, and give us feedback, right? So today we have two organizers. I'll introduce myself. I'm Shubham, working as a professional integration developer in Millennium. That's all. Over to you, Giri.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining for the today. I'm Giridhar. I'm a certified architect in MuleSoft and in various streams as well. I take care of MuleSoft accounts at Hasbin. I'm leading this Mysore group, and then I'm proud to say that I'm a MuleSoft ambassador. And today we have Vijay with us. He's a regular and well-known speaker in Mysore group, and he always enjoys sharing his knowledge with the community. Today, he'll be sharing his expertise on CloudHub 2.0 and walking us through the configurations at the platform level and how it can improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the business needs. Over to you, Zach. All the best.
Yeah, thank you, Giri. Let me share my screen. Please confirm me.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it is useful.
Thank you. So, thank you, everyone. So I'm Vijay Ragan Venkadatri. So, currently, I'm an integration architect at Ernest and GDS. So, I handle accounts based on MuleSoft solutioning and implementation. So I'm almost around 12 years of experience in integration and API products. So right from my inception of my career, so majorly into the integration API products, spanning across multiple technology on the integration API products, specifically on IBM suite as well as in MuleSoft. And with respect to MuleSoft, I'm a certified architect and developer, and I'm being a MuleSoft mentor and speaker. So I've been 3x certified in MuleSoft and 6x certified in IBM. So that's a short introduction about me. So let's jump into today's session. So today we are gonna see about CloudHub 2.0. I'm pretty much sure that like most of the people who are being an audience in this call, you guys have already attended CloudHub 2.0 session earlier in the previous meetup groups. But this particular session, what we are going to talk about is how we are going to do the platform configuration code of 2.0. So more than just to understand shared space and private space, we are going to do a deep dive on the platform configuration level. Um so the agenda starts from the basic introduction on MuleSoft and AnyPoint platform, and then CloudUp or 2.0. That is like initial discussion on the difference between 1.1, 2.0, and share space versus private space, and what is the limitation we have. And then we jump into the actual arena of to understand the private space landscape in 2.0, and then what are the prerequisites to set up your private space, VPN, management configuration, firewall tools, and how you can use the net tools in order to do the connectivity check. So these are the things that we're going to see. And with respect to the this platform configuration, since being a trial account, so we have a limitation of configuring all these parameters in the platform. But being a trial account, we can configure, but our private space and VPN will not be fully functional. So as part of this session, I will be walking through how you can do the configuration. But what are the configuration I'm going to do will not fully operational functional, but it's just for your visibility. So only with the your procured licensing you can do that. So probably this particular platform setup, I'm sure that not everyone get an opportunity to do that. But if you get an opportunity in future, probably in your working organization, so probably this session would be a good start for your to the platform configuration. So let me quickly jump into the starting. So yeah, so so it's pretty simple. So MuleSoft and AnyPoint platform. I'm sure that everybody aware of what is MuleSoft and AnyPoint platform. So rather than me just reading out the definition, probably let me put my perspective of what I understand from MuleSoft. Uh, so when I was working as a integration and the API architect in other technology, so MuleSoft was slowly evolving as an ESB product to compete with the other product in the market, which were like that is like super power in terms of providing the integration solutions. So initially it was a ESB API product, but from the the evolution that I see from MuleSoft, they just go beyond from just being a ESB product. So they initially started with the system integration, and then they slowly moved to a process integration by introducing MuleSoft Composer, and then they step one more ahead and leverage the human process automation through RPA. So we just can't isolate or classify MuleSoft into a just an integration API product. It's way beyond that. So there is a lot of umbrella, and the system integration API product management is part of it. So that's how the current MuleSoft stands for. And I'm looking forward, like how what is the other boundary they're going to touch in terms of AI and other stuff, like how we are going to incorporate the MuleSoft. So how they are going to extend everything within the MuleSoft as a product. So that is I'm looking forward to the MuleSoft community and as well as the MuleSoft engagement. And that's a perspective of MuleSoft what I have. And as coming to AnyPoint platform, so AnyPoint platform, as you guys know, it's meant for system integration. It's a component. It's a unified platform that offers a holistic approach to API design and development. So it facilitates everything from the API lifecycle. Let probably start from your design, publish, feedback, build, deploy, manage, and secure. So everything, whatever you need, it is facilitating within the platform itself, because it comprises the component for each of it. For example, you have for design you have a component, let's say AnyPoint designer, you have design center is there, and then you have a flow designer. For publishing you have a portal, for publish and feedback you have a portal which is exchange and public portal. For deployment you have a runtime manager and API manager. For manage and secure you have a API manager and you have API analytics. So a lot of components, it's kind of embedded within it. So that's why we call the AnyPoint platform as a holistic approach to the API lifecycle. uh, that's a quick introduction. So let's jump into CloudHub 2.0. So CloudHub 2.0 is one of the deployment offerings from MuleSoft. So as you know, there are multiple deployment offerings MuleSoft provides that start from CloudHub. Initially started with CloudHub 1.0, which is the iPaaS. So the CloudHub 2.0 is the next version of it, and then we have RTF as well. And then that if you can we have a customer manager, the MuleSoft managed component, and also you have on-premise running instances. So CloudHub 2.0 is a fully managed containerized integration platform as a service, because the integration and the API that you're going to run, it can be deployed and managed as a lightweight container in AWS cloud. So the benefits that we are going to get out of CloudHub 2.0 is because it provides availability of regions around 12 across globally. Okay, and then it has the ability to scale the infrastructure and built-in services up and down, to support your elastic volume of transaction. Also, it has a built-in security policies protecting your service sensitive data with encrypted secret, firewall controls, and restricted shell access. So these are the additional inbuilt feature that AnyPoint platform comprises on the Cloud 2.0. Also, it's majorly the 2.0 also provides some important feature that it provides a standardized isolation boundary by running each Mule instance service as a separate container. Probably to if you look at the difference between 1.2 and 2.0, you may. So in 1.0, it is a virtual machine based platform on cloud. Okay, it is a probably they would be having because both the 1.1 cloud or 2.0 leverages the AWS cloud. and in that it internally uses a EC2 instance. Okay, from that it is a VM based one where your mule runtimes are deployed on the workers, so that we call workers in 1.2. 2.0 is a containerized platform where it to put it on a technical term, it uses a Kubernetes architecture. Okay, that where like the AnyPoint runtime fabric is sit on top of it, so that's a behind the screen architecture of 2.0. And everything we deploy is running as a pod, containerized pod. Okay, and it's completely isolated from other mule application. Whereas in 1.0, within the same VM, you may be having multiple mule application running within it, so there's no isolation of data processing. Whereas in 2.0, every mule application you deploy, it will be in a separate container. It's completely isolated, so that's a containerized approach that 2.2 has taken into account. And that's where the evolution started from being in a virtual machine to a containerized mode from 1.2 to 2.2. And to see the difference between the capabilities between 1.2 and 2.2, probably we can understand from the application standpoint as well as network standpoint. From the application standpoint, 1.2 doesn't support the mutual TLS, whereas 2.4 support the mutual TLS. Datagraph was supported in 1.0, but it is not supported in 2.0. In 1.0, you can you utilize both the object store v1 and v2, whereas in 2.0 it only with the object store v2. And deployment rollback is not supported in 1.2, and it is supported in 2.0. Most important point here is on the port level. So we have segregation of internal routing with the load balancer, that 8081 will be used for HTTP internal routing and 8082 for the HTTPS internal routing, whereas it is only 8081, be it either it is HTTP or HTTPS. But for on public, HTTPS will be 443 and HTTPS 80. So that's on the application level capabilities between the 1.1 and 2.2. And coming to the network capabilities, there are certain separate configuration systems we have in the 1.4, where you have virtual private cloud, VPN, and AWS transit gateway attachments. And these are the separate configurations you had in 1.4, whereas in 2.0, everything comprised under private space. So private space is actually a virtual private cloud, and within the private space as well, you'll be able to configure VPN or transit gateway attachments. So these are things actually we are going to see today. And most important point is outbound firewall rules are not supported in 1.0, whereas it is supported in 2.0. Probably these terms are maybe few these terms are kind of jargon to few of the people, but we are going to kind of deep dive these this network capabilities in the upcoming slides. Okay, currently see just high level differentiation of network capability between the 1.1 and 2.0. And most important point is that in case of VPC is acquired in the 1.0, then the dedicated load balancer has to be set up for the VPC, and the load balancer locks are not supported. Whereas there is no DLB configuration required in 2.0, you can very well go with the ingress option, and you have the load balancer locks that is supported, that you are able to see the load balancer locks as well. And VPC peering is supported in 1.0, where you can peer your VPC to another private VPC to to have a transaction. But whereas 2.0 it's not supported, so that in that for you have to go with the transit gateway and other stuff. So let's see on the 2.0 architecture. So that is mainly when you talk about so what is 2.0 iPaaS. It's either you're going to deploy your application in the containers mode, that should be on the shared space or the private space. So first let's understand what is the shared space and the private space. So shared space is a public cloud, and private space is a private cloud, so we can put it that way. So ideally when we say public, it means it's a multi-tenant mode of containerization, that within the region you would be able to deploy your applications to that particular region, and other application, I mean other organization also will come and deploy their applications to that region. So the region will be shared across multiple organizations. That's called multi-tenant mode. Whereas in private space, you will be allocated with the specific boundary of that region, and only you would be able to deploy your application, so nobody having access to that. So that's where it's a relevant to your virtual private cloud. So that's a ideal difference between shared space and the private space. And and you have to think in a way of what is the requirement, I have to choose going for shared space and private space. So first of all, as per my experience, shared space will not be used 95%. I'm pretty much sure that will not be used by the organization. Okay, any organization, they are going for cloud hub approach. Okay, they always go for private space. The reason is, uh, shared space, there is no isolation of data transaction on the shared space, because it is being shared by other organization as well. So that will, kind of, there is no security vulnerability we have in clouds, cloud hub. But there is a concern of isolation is required from the organization's perspective. Okay. And most of the organization, they would be having a set of requirement that they need to have integration with their existing corporate data center, that would be their on-premise instances, or any separate private cloud that you have to kind of talk to them. Because definitely any organization will not keep their components over the internet. Maybe one or two components, probably Salesforce and some e-commerce system would be in the over the internet. But their ideally data management and transaction management and finance management systems and all will be within the security boundary or the DMC zone within the corporate data center. So that's where, like, when you go for a organization, definitely they will not go on out for the shared space. Okay. And other factor here is, when you go for shared space, the domain names are specific to MuleSoft, and it doesn't have any option to customize the domain name for your organization. And you cannot use the domain certificates for the TLS termination. So these are the limitation in the shared space. Whereas in private space, you can have your own boundary, and you can have set up the connective connection to the your corresponding corporate data center, be it on premise or the private cloud. And you have an option of configuring a vanity domain in the public endpoint. Also you will be able to enable the mutual TLS, and in addition to that, you'll be adding your domain certificate for the TLS termination. So these are advantage. To put it on a nutshell, chat space are literally used for kind of a training purpose, the trial account, or probably from corporate engagement POC purpose. Only on that note, chat space predominantly used. Private space is the one where you will be going for in terms of configuring your connectivity as well as the platform setup for the organization level. So that's pretty much on shared space and the private space. The next one is, what is the limitation you have in cloud 2.0? So the ideal limitation is, it provides only 100 private spaces per organization, and then 10 VPN per private space. So within a private space, you can configure up to 10 VPN, and then 5 transit gateway attachments are allowed. And you have 180 inbound and 180 outbound firewalls are applicable per organization. And then you can create up to maximum of 10 TLS contexts per private space. Okay. And the application that you're going to deploy should be have the size of up to 200 MB. More than that, it will not be allowed. And for the TLS context, there is no restriction on the number of client certificates that you need to add, but there is a restriction on the file size that MuleSoft and the platform accept, which is the key store size should be shouldn't exceed the 40 KB, and the trust store shouldn't exceed about 128 KB. So these are the ideal limitation from the cloud of 2.2. But uh, as far as my concern, that this is not a very big limitation in terms of proceeding on cloud of 2.2 as a hypers integration, because it it kind of fully minimize your effort on hosting infrastructure and managing infrastructure altogether in the customer space. So, and definitely this much of heavy bounded requirement is not there for the organization. And if it is there, then they have an option of go for on premises or the RTO based on the infrastructure, however they want to extend with the customer space, they can extend. So that's a pretty much about on the limitations in cloud of 2.2. And let's understand the private scale and private space landscape in 2.0. So by seeing this picture, you'll be able to figure out what we're going to discuss. Okay. So the cloud of the platform itself is in the AWS cloud. So where you could see it's in the AWS cloud. So within the cloud, you are creating a private space for yourself, where you want to deploy your APIs and then make sure that those are isolated. Okay. So there are two set of isolations. So one isolation is your by default your applications are containerized, so which means no other application can directly talk to it. But the other isolation is your group list of applications, so that is, should be, run on the secured boundary. So there shouldn't be any, that boundary shouldn't be shared with any other organization. So that's the ideal space. You are using a private space. Okay, so that's fine. You now you're taking the private space, and you ensure that you deploy your APIs in that. And the reason is, apart from the isolation of the data, you're also having a major requirement that how you are going to integrate your API with the systems that are available in your corporate data center. So this corporate data center will be having your on-premise instance, or any other components. Okay, but how you are going to integrate? So let's say you have a SQL server. So how your API can talk to the SQL, that is no corporate data center. So that's where there are two options coming in picture. One is the most used option is IPsec tunneling, which is a VPN, which is a virtual private network we create between the private space and the corporate data center. So through that, a connection is established, and then there is a transit gateway as well. So the transit gateway is a AWS transit gateway, which will be created at the AWS infrastructure, in infrastructure of your corporate private cloud. And MuleSoft provides offerings of creating a transit gateway attachment to that. So using that, it become a hub. You can connect more than one corporate data center using a transit gateway, and also you can connect to the private cloud. In this session, what we are going to see about is on the VPN tunneling, and how you that can be connected to corporate data center, and how you can create a private space, and how you can secure your private space in terms of vanity domain configuration, and how to do the TLS termination. Also, like how you can regulate your traffic to your private space by restricting the firewall rules. Okay, these are things we are going to see in today's session. And whenever you create a private space, by default it will create a public and private DNS target. So that public DNS target is the one, is a default public endpoint, we call it out, that is by default provided by the MuleSoft itself. Okay, so that particular the public endpoint is meant to accept HTTP and HTTPS traffic outside the VPC, which could be coming from the internet, or which could be a cloud application, any third party system, which can send the data to MuleSoft API using the public endpoint. Okay, and there is a another private DNS, okay, which is a secured endpoint, and that secured endpoint can be used within the private space, which means you have a as you guys know that MuleSoft follows the API led approach, and you have an option of experience API calling process, and process API calling system, right? So you can that particular private endpoints plays a role there. So the experience API use the private endpoint to call the the process API, and process API use the private endpoint to call the system API. And this is one scenario, but the major scenario is if there is a system sitting in the corporate data center, and they want to connect to the API. Let's say there is a system, they want to invoke a API that is resides in the private space. So in that case, they have to use the private endpoint. So they have to kind of invoke that API through the private endpoint to send the data. So that's where the private endpoint come into picture. This is inbound traffic. So one could be from the public, and one could be from the private, and there's outbound traffic as well. So when the outbound traffic is when MuleSoft API wants to send data. So when I say the send data, the system API, let's talk about the system API can talk to any system that could be sitting within the corporate data center, or that could be sitting over the public internet. So let's say I have a Salesforce interaction, okay, which is in the internet, and I have a any in-house CRM system that sits in the corporate data center. So in that case, outbound traffic will be goes public as well as private. So when it goes public, so it by default goes to over the internet, and when it is go to private, which means I need to talk to any system in the corporate data center, then the VPN tunneling and our transit gateway will be used accordingly. Okay, so this is the ideal private scape landscape in 2.0. And we will see, like when there is a scenario happen, okay, you have been provisioned with the MuleSoft licensing, and customer is required to set up a private space platform configuration, ensure this platform setup is done before any API that you're going to develop actual use case APIs. So that's why we are going to see, like what are all the step and approach you have to take, and how you can do the configuration. So this is though the configuration going to be pretty easier. But the needless to say that you have to talk to the corresponding organization team, you have to liaise with the network and network security team, to get all the information, because whatever the value you are going to configure for private space, VPN, domain certificates, firewall rules, everything is depend on the landscape of the organization that you're going to work. So you have to understand the the network infrastructure. So ideally, like it's a let's say let me put it in a nutshell that probably it takes couple of days for you to set up this the overall infrastructure activity, but it might take more than 2 weeks to get all those information by having multiple sitting session with them to get the information before doing that. So it's going to be conversation based platform configuration, I would probably call it out. So first, let's understand from the private space prerequisite. So private space, as I said, it's a separate isolation boundary that you're going to create. Okay, and you can create per organization or you can create per business group. It depends on the client requirement. So before you do any configuration, you have to get all the prerequisite in hand, and then only you have to go into the configuration. So first, with respect to private space, uh, as per the recommendation, there will be two private space, okay, per business group, or it could be per organization level itself. Okay, so one is non-production private space, another one is production private space. So when it's a non-production private space, it could be covering all the sandbox environments. So when I say sandbox environments, which is a non-production of like dev, SIT, QA, stage, UAT, pre-prod, everything will be covered under non-production private space. And private space meant for production activity, which is production based environments. Okay, so only these two private space has to be segregated. And within the non-production private space, you have to do the bifurcation of this environment like dev, SIT, because you cannot create multiple non-production environment, one for dev, one for SIT. That is not a recommended approach, because by default, there is a limitation of creating number of private space per organization based on the licensing that you go for, because you have a list of subscription, as you know, that like gold, platinum, and titanium. So based on that, the number of vcos and number of vpcs provided to your subscription will differ. So you have to go with one private space for all non-production environment and one private space for production environment. It's as simple as that. Now, coming to that, what are all the prerequisites that you need for the private space? Okay, so there are five things that you require. One is you have to know the private space name, private space region, and the CIDR block, and the DNS server IP and internet domains. Let's see one by one what are all these things. So private space name is something that you have to define the name of the private space, and that's a restriction. It could be like up to 3 to 42 characters, and it can contain lowercase numbers and dashes. But the format should be, it should contain the organization name. It should contain the region name where you're creating a private space. It should have an environment specification as well. The format would be your org name hyphen the region where you're going to create, and the environment and hyphen ps. So ps define the private space here. So this is a ideal format that you have to define the name of your private space. And the next one is private space region. So when I say private space region, so there are 12 available region that MuleSoft provides. So you have to pick one. So where you want to create the private space, okay? And then the decision of selecting the region is not up to you. It is up to your organization network team, because they have to tell you where this corporate data center lies. Okay, so you have to pick this region as closest as possible to your corporate data center to ensure to reduce the latency of transaction. So for example, the corporate data center resides in somewhere in Malaysia. You can't pick the US region. Okay, so that increases the latency. So in that case, you have to go and pick the as nearest possible location, which is Asia Pacific, Singapore. So that's how you have to specifically look for selecting the region for your private space. Okay, so that is a major step you have to pick in terms of selecting the region. And the next one is CADR ranges. So this is an interesting topic that I would mention. So the CADR, before understanding CADR, first let's understand when you create a private space, you should be having some range of IPs allocated for that private space. Okay, which means whenever you deploy application, okay, which means like it's as a continuous mode. Let's say you're deploying 10 API into the private space. It means each API require IPs to identify, because each is running as a container, and each required to identify itself through an IP. Okay, so how you're going to define this? Okay, that's where you have to pick the CDR block. CDR is a subnet mask of your network. So you have, in that case, everything that you have to liaise with the network team of the organization to understand. You have to get the CDR block. Okay, so there you have to ask them. The CDR block should be, not the existing one that is being used by other components in the network. It should be unused one, and you have to get the ranges accordingly. Okay, so when I say ranges, MuleSoft always recommends a /22 CDR block. Okay, so let me give a small example. So as you guys know, an IPv4, it's a combination of, so this is a, ideal IP. When you have a scenario of getting a CDR block, which means that each IP range is an octet. Okay, so it's a 8-bit, totally 32-bit IP is a IPv4 what we have. Okay, the CDR block is denoted by the, how much you're going to pick up. For example, if I say 24, it means that this is the IP range I'm getting in, which means that the 24 is, you have to subtract by the 32, which means you will be having around 8. So it means this first three will not be changed, whereas the last octet will get changed, like where you can define from the 0 to 250, I think 255. Okay, so you'll be having those many number of IPs. So when we say 24, which means you might be getting 256 IP in general. Okay, so when you say 22, you'll be getting 1026 IP. Okay, so let me show. There is a, so let's say this is a IP range, which I've got from the network team. Okay, so this is the CDR block. So what it says is my start IP would be 10.0.0.0. Okay, my last IP would be 10.0.0.255. Okay, so ideally 0 to 255 is a each octet range. Okay, so it is, represent the octal format, and which means it provides around 256 IP for me. Okay, when this particular range is decreased, you will be getting as much as IP you want. For example, if I say 22, then I will be getting 1026 IP, which means the permutation combination will change. So this is my start IP, and the end IP would be this. Okay, so ideally it's as I said, when I say octet, so each represented by a octet value. Let's say one. I'm just giving an example. So when I say 24, only this octet will change. Okay, when I say 22, which means 20 is 10, it will be kind of 10. So it is 8 from this block and 2 bits from this block. So totally 10 bits it can change. So when you even reduce it, right, let's say, let me call it out 16, which means I can have this, the last 16 blocks can be changed. So this is how, your IP ranges will change accordingly. So this is how the CIR block for IPv4 is represented. And as you see, MuleSoft ideally /22 range, which will provide 1026 IP. Okay, but the accepted smallest range is /24, which you may get up to 256 IP, and the largest range is /16, which you may get up to 65,536 IP. So this is a range. But just because MuleSoft recommends to /22, you cannot go and pick this range. Okay, you have to do the capacity planning of your private space. So when I say capacity planning, you have to understand how many API you are going to develop to the deploy to the private space. Okay, there are a lot of lot of points that you have to take into consideration before determining the CDR block. One is probably first you have to see how many environments you have that in the private space. Okay, each environment, how many API are going to be deployed, and then, as you know, for the zero downtime, by default two IPs no reserved for that API that you're going to deploy for zero downtime. Okay, and then how many replicas you are going to increase for that API. For example, in dev and SAT, you may not be increasing the replicas for API, but whereas in the UAT production, you will be having the number of replicas more than one. So for that also you have to consider. And then there is a fault tolerance infrastructure. The subnet will be get divided to the maximum of up to 4 availability zone in the AWS infrastructure. Okay, and the last one is there is some additional set of IPs will be reserved for infrastructure perspective. That is a behind the scene inbuilt feature. So probably when you have to understand a way, let's say let's talk about production. So when you say production, let's say I'm going to deploy 100 API. When it is 100 API, each API by default having two IPs reserved for um let's say two IPs reserved for zero downtime. Okay, and then I would say that each API I'm going to have two replicas in production. So when I say two replicas, it means it becomes 400 IPs. Okay, and these 400 IPs can be kind of subdivided into four availability zone, which means 4 into 4 will provide you around 1600 IPs. Okay, and you have to always calculate 10% of it. Okay, 10% of uh, the overall IP. So when I say 10%, which is 160 IPs, probably 1600 plus 160, probably you can round it off to 1800 IPs. So this is how you have to define. So when you need 1800 IPs, then probably you have to go for CADA block of slash 21. Let's see how much it gives. It gives around 2000. Okay, so that's how you have to determine serial block, and you have to do this in analysis, like how many use cases you're developing, how many API you're going to develop, how you're going to deploy it, how many replicas you're going to provide. So based on that you have to ask, because once you configure the CIDR block, once you create the private space, if you want to change the CIDR IP ranges of it, you cannot do that. You have to delete all together, and how many ever the API you deploy to the private space all go in vain. You have to create a new private space with a new CTL block, and then you have to redeploy everything. So this particular value, before you're determining, you have to be very cautious on this note. And always the thumb rule in media block is, let's say if you're using 100 APIs, okay, and it's always 10 times on it, which is 1000 IPs required. So that's how you have to calculate. So this is a way of serial block determination. And the next one is DNS and the internal domains. Okay, so this is a internal DNS server. So when I say internal DNS server, you create a private space, and the most required means of creating a private space to have a connection established to the corporate data center. So you should have the DNS server configured here in terms of resolving the IPs. I mean, resolving the domain that you are going to call within the corporate data center. So DNS server IP should be configured. You can configure more than one IP, because an organization may have one or more DNS server to resolve. So you have to configure the IPs with the comma separated, and the internal domains. So what are the domain you may configure? So you can give the list of internal domains, and also you can give the wildcard as well. Okay, you need not to give the fully qualified domain name. Probably you can give the wildcard as well in terms of resolving it. So these are the ideal prerequisite for the private space. Now let's go to the runtime manager, see how you can create a private space. So when you go to runtime manager, so you'd be seeing private space here. Click it. Now you can create a private space. So first you have to define a private space name. So let me say my private space name as So my organization could be Mysore, just giving it for the namesake, and the region is US, and I can say it's a prod one and hyphen PS. So that's the name of it. You can first create it, okay, but it is not fully created. You have to create a configuration out of this. So in this, if you come on the network tab, you would be seeing a create private network. So here you have to define your region where you're selecting. Since it is being my trial account, only the US OEO is allowed by default. I cannot select other region, and then I have to define my CDA block. So as I said, I'm going to configure 0/22, which is going to provide me 1026 IPs for the private space I'm creating. You have to click create. It will not create, but I'll be able to show you what are all the way you can configure. So whatever the things I'm creating, it will not be functional or optional or operational, but I can able to show you the configuration. So as of now, you have provided the private space name, CADR block, and the region is selected, and ideally it will create 30 minutes to create a private space and make it up and running. Okay, so once it is created, you'll be able to see the public DNS. Okay, the public DNS is the public endpoint of yours. So where you would be seeing this is the 6 digit of your private unique ID of your private space dot region dot cloudhub.io. So this is a public domain. By default you'll be getting, and you will be getting a private DNS as well. Okay, that is specific to organizations. It will pop up only when your private space is created after 30 minutes, and then it will also show you the inbound static IPs and the outbound static IPs. So the inbound static is the one that will be picked up by the the uh, I would say the public DNS target and the private DNS target, and the outbound static IP will define from the AWS infrastructure. So this will be seen only when it is get created, and you need not to wait to configure the DNS server of your corporate network until this the private space is created. You can very well go and configure it. Where how you are configured, there's an internal DNS server. You can click the configure, where you can define the list of IPs that is there for your public which is of the corporate data center. Let's say this is my IP of my DNS internal DNS server that resides in the corporate data center. Probably let me give two IPs, and I can tell that okay, I need to resolve this domain, because this domain within my corporate data center. So I need to resolve this, so that then only I'd be able to establish a connection from my private space to the corporate data center via the VPN. So ideally the request will talk to the DNS first. It resolve to see whether this domain falls under the corporate data center. If it is not, then it will go for the outbound connectivity of over the internet. So this is how you configure the private space. So as I said, it will take around 30 minutes to create a private space, and then there's a next step of configuration, that creating a VPN to establish a connection connectivity to your corporate space, as well as how you can enable the vanity URL and firewall root restriction. Everything you can see. In the meantime, there is a network tab, domain TLS firewall, that we will see it now. Which is after the slides, and then there is a one more thing on environments. So you have to associate the environment. So you have to define which environment you have to associate. Is it a sandbox or production? So probably as I say prod, I will associate production environment, and I have to mention whether it is for the business group and child or specific to business sector business group, so that you can able to configure it. So this is how you have to associate your environment to the private space. And then next one is prerequisite for creating a virtual private network, which is a VPN. Okay, so as I've already mentioned, so VPN is the one which will help you to create a connection to your corporate network. Okay, and each private requires at least one VPN. No, each private space requires at least one VPN tunneling to the on-premise of your corporate data center. Okay, so there will be two tunnels per VPN. For when one VPN is established, there will be two tunnels by default. Okay, so the tunnel is the one where we will receive the network packets from the in and out of the private space as well as the corporate data center. So it could be either active tunneling, or it could be active passive tunneling based on the network router configuration what you have in your organization. Okay, so this information you have to discuss with your network team to understand what is the network router configuration, whether it is going to be active active tunneling or active passive tunneling. Because there is an important concept called asymmetric and symmetric routing that the router will have. When there's a asymmetric routing, it means there are two tunnels active in the VPN. Okay, which means when the data packet is sent from the corporate data center to the private space. So let's say let's pick up the request reply pattern for a better understanding. So there is an API call comes from the corporate data center to the private space for an API. So it comes for tunnel one. Okay, so when it is asymmetric routing, it means the response of the particular API request will go back with the same tunnel. Okay, if it is a symmetric routing, it means that you would be able to get the response in other tunnel as well. Okay, so if they don't have a configuration, it means that the traffic will be closed at the corporate data center level. So that's where you have to ensure that they should be supporting asymmetric routing. Then only you have to go for activity configuration. If they're not supporting, then it should be active passive. Only one tunnel will be always active, so all the request response data packets will be maintained within the tunnel. So if there's a tunnel issue, I mean, if there's an issue on the tunnel, then the other passive tunnel will come active. So that's how it has to be managed. So this is something that you have to discuss with your network team before determining it. And then there is a additional option of configuring a redundant VPN as well for your private space. Okay, so in the initial VPN that you are configuring for a private space, that will be the primary one. As a fail-safe mechanism, you can have another set of VPN configuration, which could be in that's what we call the redundant VPN. So once the primary VPN goes out, the redundant VPN will comes into picture to to ensure there is no zero downtime of transnationality between the private space and the corporate data center. So as like private space, we have a set of prerequisite for the private VPN as well. Like you have to define the VPN name, remote IP of the VPN, and then you have to know what the routing device information, like what are all these things, and then how would be the routing type, whether a static or dynamic routing. And then there's a local ASN, remote ASN, and static IP CEDAR ranges of the corporate data center. So let's see one by one. So VPN name, it is similar to what you have coined the name for private space. So they the same way it should have the organization name, region name, environment specification, everything. So where you can have the org name hyphen region hyphen environment hyphen VPN. So we will define the virtual private network. So this is a defining of the VPN name. And the next one is a remote IP. So remote IP is a public IP of your VPN endpoint. So ideally, when there's a VPN, so there's a two side of connectivity. One is VPN at your private space and the VPN at the corporate end. Okay, so you should be having the public IP of the VPN endpoint, and this should be always static. That you have to get from the network team. And then you have to get the you have to first understand the device, the routing device they have in the VPN, whether it is being supported under the list of supported device and under MuleSoft. So you have to share this information with them. So these are the routing device will be supported by the MuleSoft VPN. If it is not falling under this, then you have to check for other option. Probably you have to go with the Grafter gateway. But most of the thing, they either use the Checkpoint or Cisco or Dell. So most of the device will fall under this, but you have to ensure that it is falling under the supported category. So you have to get the information of what is the device vendor, what is the device platform they're using, what is the device software they're using. So you have to get the information, because this information is required to download the VPN connection guide. I'll explain what is upcoming slide. And the next one is routing type. Okay, so the routing type is from the private space, how you are going to route the traffic to the VPN. Is it a static routing or the dynamic routing? Okay, as per the recommendation from the MuleSoft, it's always suggestible to go for the dynamic routing. Okay, so when you say dynamic routing, you have to just contact their ASN, and routing of the IP will take care at their end, or you have to configure the CEDAR range of their particular corporate data center in order to route the traffic. Okay, so in case if the customer is adamant of going for static routing, then you have to ensure their VPN router must be able to the list of network standards provided by them. Then only the static routing will work. For example, These are the network standard they're looking for. For example, it has to establish the I key security association using the PSK, which is a pre-shared key, and then it should also give the IPsec security association in tunnel mode, and then it should also provide any combination of IPsec settings that AnyPoint platform supports. Okay, and most important point is before encryption, the IP packet should be fragmented. Fragment in the sense you have to create a chunk of data. Okay, for example, you have a 1 KB of data that should be created in terms of the bytes, like 5 chunks or 6 chunks. So then only it should be encrypted, and then it should use at least any one security association pair per tunnel. And then the most important point is it should have a DPD, which the dead period deduction is. So when the VPN is enabled at the corporate data center, so they have to create some interesting traffic every like 5 seconds or 2 seconds, one to ensure that the static IP of our private space, to ensure the VPN is active. So that is by default will be there. So it should be that, that's what the expectation is meant, and they should allow asymmetric routing, and they should also have the algorithm of different element phase 2, and then it should have the PFS, which is a perfect forward security. These are the network security standards is least expected from the VPN router that they have in the corporate data center if they are opting for static routing. And if they are going for dynamic routing, which is a broader, which uses the broader border gateway protocol, so it requires the additional network standards apart from whatever you are seeing from the static routing, which is it should establish the BGP peering, and it should do the support of route based VPN, and also it should ensure the PFS, which is the same way that you have seen for the static routing. So this should be discussed with your network team to decide whether you're going for static routing or dynamic routing. And there are additional configuration based on the routing time will change. There is a concept called local ASN. So local ASN is IP prefix of the a routing group. So this local ASN is a it is a MuleSoft one. Okay, so MuleSoft side of AnyPoint VPN. So it is a local ASN port, will fall under in the ranges of 64,512 to 6,45,534. So by default, you'll be having the local ASN port, which is 64,512, and you have to ensure that this is not being already used, or assigned to any of the application in the network. So so this should be, either you have to go for default, you have to ensure that the particular port you are going to assign for the local ASN should be a new one. And this is required for both static and dynamic, but one difference here is for dynamic it is always required. For static it is required only for the very first time. For example, if you are going to create static, you are going to get more, multiple VPN, you have to configure the local ASN only for the very first time. It is not required for the second or the subsequent time. So that is ideal difference between the configuring local ASN. And there is a remote ASN. This remote ASN is a this is required only on the dynamic routing. And why it is required is, as the name it says, dynamic routing. So you have to, your local ASN has to contact the remote ASN of your corporate network. So the route will the routing will happen there. You just need to reach your remote ASN, and there it will route the IPs to accordingly. So again, it is having the ranges of 64,000, I mean 64,512 to 6,55,000, 65,534. And by default you will be having around the value of the default port as 65,001. So that is your default value. And you can, and the recommendation is you can either use the existing ASN as well, whatever they has been assigned, but uh, it's up to the network team has to decide which ASN value they have to use it. So you have to get it from them if you're going for the dynamic routing. And the very last one is a static IP CDR ranges. So this is required only when you are configuring in terms of static routing, because when you say static routing, it means then you have to have the broadcasting list, like what are all the IP ranges I'm going to route it. Okay, so for that you have to get the CDR ranges of the corporate data center, and you have to configure it. So this is the prerequisite of VPN. So let's go and check the how you can do that. So under the same private space, there is a option called connections. So if you click the create connection, you'll be able to given the option of VPN and transit gateway. So in this session we are going to see only VPN. So it has the VPN name, as I've already said. So let me give the VPN as org name as Mysore, the region is US, and the environment is prod hyphen VPN. So once this is done, I have to give the static IP of the VPN. So let's say my static IP is 10.20.20.0 and I have to select dynamic routing type or static routing type. Okay, so let's see both options. So when I click dynamic routing type, I have to define my local ASN. I have to define my remote ASN as well. Okay, in case if I go for static routing, I have to define the local ASN for the very first time, but I have to define the static route. So what is the CDR block of ranges of the corporate network that I'm going to route it? So let's say 10.0.1.1/8. Okay, this is a the CDR block of the corporate data center in order to do routing. So this is the difference, ideal difference between the dynamic and static routing. And then very well you can go and create a VPN. Sorry, my IP range is wrong. Sheet. Okay. So when you create a VPN, it takes around 15 minutes to create a VPN. Okay, but the VPN will not be active very immediately. Okay, what happens is it once it create, it will be down. Okay, then there is a VPN connection gate that you have to download. So this is the information I usually mentioned. You have to get the device vendor, platform, software, everything. So you have to select that information. What is it? So this is a routing. Is a device mentioned this the router of the the corporate VPN. So you have to select the information and download the connection guide and share this connection guide with the network team. So they have to do the configuration at their end. So once this is done, you would be seeing there will be two tunnel one and tunnel two. So it will be under the green light. Okay. So as I said, if they are supporting asymmetric routing, they can have two tunnel active at the same time. If it is not being supported, then you can go for active passive tunnel. So when I say active passive tunneling, so it could be one is green, one could be red. Okay, so only one particular tunnel will be active at the same time. So once it goes on, the other the passive tunnel will become active. So this is the VPN configuration. So once it is active, then you would be able to create a connection established to the corporate data center. But there is one thing that you have to discuss in network team. Though you are able to create a VPN, they might be having an internal firewall restrictions. Okay, probably whatever the system that you want to talk to, that you have to ensure that firewall is enabled at their end as well. Okay, so this is a pretty much on private space and the VPN configuration. And the next one is vanity domain configuration and the prerequisites. So as I have said, by default, when you create a private space, you will be provided with the public DNS target. That is a DNS target of what CloudHub is offering to you. But when you're going for organization level, they will not use this MuleSoft provided public DNS, because it uses the MuleSoft certificates. So they each organization will be having their own individual in-house certificates for the TLS termination. So as part of that, each certificate will be having the particular organization domain names to to enable the public endpoint. So for example, let's say the vanity domain, let's say that the bifurcation will be having of that org name would be like mysore.com. But when you are going to create it for non-production and production, okay, so ideal practice is we are having a private space for non-production and one private space for production. Okay, so the ideal practice is they will be generating the domain certificates, which would be a CA sign. In case of non-production, you have to do the environment bifurcation. So when I say environment bifurcation, probably you have to go and create a number of certificates which is matching to your environment, or you can have single certificate and you can have a multiple subdomain which we call sans in the certificate. So that you can have dev.orgname.com and asset.orgname.com and qa.orgname.com. So that's how you can do the domain configuration. On production, by default, it is straightforward, only one certificate with the prod domain name. Okay, so you have to get the domain certificates which would be a CA signed one from the organization, and using that you would be able to configure the vanity domain. So how you would be able to do that is, under the same private space, you can go to the domain and TLS. You can create a TLS context. Okay, so you should be able to create upload a trust store, sorry, upload a key store. The key store format is accepted. It could be a perm format as well as a jks format. So in case of perm, you have to upload the public certificate, private certificate which is provided by them, and the key password of the private key. And then is there any root chain that you have to upload? You have to upload here. So once you do that, by default you'll be able to get the DNS configuration. The ideal DNS configuration will have the domain name enable for that. Okay, and then you could be able to see the common name that is defined in the certificate as well, and that is on the perm, and you can upload jks file as well. So you have to upload the key store file and key store password and the key password as well. So these information has to be filled in before you're creating a TLS context. So by default, this is something on the MuleSoft public DNS. So where you can see this is the public DNS target of the MuleSoft provided one, and the certificate is belongs to the MuleSoft. Okay, and it allows it wildcards to all the inbound traffic by default. Okay, and when you're going to upload it, this will still there, but you can restrict the public domain name according to each application. So when you deploy an application, there is a ingress folder that you can configure the public endpoint of it. So that's how you'll be able to create a vanity URL for your application. And then you are having a option of adding a trust store as well. So when you say trust store, if you want to have a mutual TLS termination. So as of now, what even though you're configuring vanity URL, so only one side SSL. If you go for the mutual SSL, then you have to add the client certificate to the trust store and add it here. So which will ensure that mutual TLS enabled, and only then the traffic is allowed into the private space network. So this is the vanity URL configuration, and the last one is on firewall. So the firewall is a pretty interesting concept one in the private space. So as I said, it provides two firewall rules. One is inbound and one is outbound. So by default, it will enable to open to public for HTTPS and HTTP for the inbound, and for outbound you would be having HTTPS on 443 and TCP port for all ports. So this is the default firewall rules you will be seeing. So when you go to the private space content, so there is a tab called firewall rules. So here you would be able to define your HTTPS firewall route. So as of now, let's say that I'm going to get the data from only one particular set of IPs. Then you can very well restrict. Instead of saying that open to public, you can first regulate your inbound traffic, on the public endpoint by restricting your CDR ranges. For example, I can say that I will be. So I will be able to restrict my firewall here only to this particular IP ranges under 443 port. So same way you can do it for HTTP, and the most best practice is you should not allow any HTTP traffic to your inbound. Okay, because HTTP is completely unsecured, so you should not do that. So ideally you have to go and delete the existing inbound traffic, and you should allow only HTTPS and the restricted IP list of IPs. But where you will get the list of IPs, that's where you should be having a discussion with the network team to understand what are all the source systems IP ranges, so that you should be able to restrict your inbound traffic. The same way for outbound traffic as well. Okay, so if there is a scenario of for you to go over the internet to call system, then you can have the 0.0.0 or 443, or you can restrict the IP ranges accordingly. And if you don't have that scenario, you can very well restrict within that IP, or you can remove the firewall. So you can add as many number of firewall rules for both inbound and outbound according to your organization requirement. So this is a final setup in your platform configuration. Finally, there is a thing called net tools. Okay, so this net tools is provided by MuleSoft itself. Okay, because you created a private space. Okay, you created a VPN, you created a firewall, and everything is there. But how you want to test it? Okay, whether you have to see the API that I'm deploying in private space, whether it is able to reach to one of the server in the corporate network, or it is able to reach to the one of the server in the internet. How do you can check? So that's where like a net tools application that you can deploy to your private space, and there is a once the API is up, you have a public endpoint URL. Once you click it, it will take you to a page, so where you would be able to do a socket connection test, ping connection test, everything you can do, and you will be able to check the connectivity for sure, and then you can finally sign off the the private space configuration is working. And this is provided by MuleSoft itself. So if you go to the help.mulesoft.com to this URL, so this article will give you a guide like how you can do the connectivity check. So there is just thing but just another API deployment. So there will be the jar file is provided. You have to go and deploy it to your runtime manager. And once you do that, you would be able to get the public endpoint URL of that, and it will take you to the network to connectivity. And here you would be able to do the socket connection test, like you can give the host name or the port number, or you can do the ping. So you'd be able to see for yourself that the connection is able to reach, which means this net tools is trying to reach it to the corresponding IPs that could be reside either in the corporate data center or it could be over the internet. So through that you'd be able to verify all your configuration. So with this, think of the session. So any question and that I can answer. So Shubham, Giri, over to you.
Hey Vijay, I think we have two questions. One from Praveen, like, are these IP static?
Which IP?
Okay, Praveen, can you let me see if you can enable your mic.
Hi, Subhan Punendu here. I think he was posted this question when Vijay was talking about this VPN connections, multiple static IP, right? Like remote IP, local IP, ASN, all
Uh,
those.
yeah. So the VPN IP should be a static. Yes, it's a public IP. Yes.
Okay, and there is one question. From, is there a limit on the number of cider for static routing?
Uh, no, it is. It is not having a limit. You can give up to /0 till /32.
Are there any
Uh,
more questions from? Yeah, please go
yeah,
ahead.
I have a question. So, can you hear me, Vijay?
Yes, yeah, loud and clear. Yes.
Yeah. So, my question is like, is there a limit on the number of CADR ranges which we can, like, let's say, for example, we have multiple data centers, and like, I just want to know, like, how many CADRs we can add in the VPN config for static routing.
Uh, okay. See, I think it can be comma separated. Okay. I have to see. Is there any character restriction length at the VPN configuration? But for example, so when you have multiple data center, right, the VPN that you have created, to that you have to first ensure that that particular VPN having a connection established to all the data center. Okay. For example, let's say your organization having a data center, one sitting in Europe and one sitting in US. Okay. Probably the VPN connection that you have made could be only for US. So in that case you would be able to configure the CDR range of that particular data center. Okay. If your organization doesn't have a connectivity between the US and Europe, then you have to create another VPN for the private space to create a connection to the Europe data center.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Any further?
Vijay, can you go to the private space configuration once on TLS part?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, tell me.
So here on the TLS context, which you said we can upload multiple TLS content. So
Yes.
in my non-production environment, let's say I've created a private space for non-prod, and there are three environments associated with it. So I need to upload three different TLS contexts in order to allow the inbound to this.
Okay, yeah, so that's where, right? So the best practice here is for non-production, you can have a single certificate, but you can have multiple domain. Okay, so probably you would have heard the name of SAN, SAN, subdomain names, right? So within a single certificate, you can have a bifurcation of environment names like dev.organization.com, qa.organization.com. That's how you can have multiple domain. A single certificate will enable the multiple domain for you. But if you don't want to do that, I want to have a individual certificates for each domain, then you have to create multiple TLS contexts, one for dev, one for QA, and one for UAT. That's how you have to do it.
Okay, so the recommended approach on a single certificate still can have all three domains.
Yes, and this something you can recommend, but that the decision has to be taken by your corporate network team, because
Okay,
they
and
are the one.
okay,
Yeah, go ahead,
so
go ahead, Vijay.
and in this section we are just uploading our key store, right? And for trust store, you have said we have below
See,
sections.
key store, you can either get a, you have to tell them that either they have to provide the JKS file to you, or they have to provide the perm file to you. So both are key stores. Okay, so for if they are providing perm file, they will be providing a public certificate and the private certificate with the key password. If it is a JKS file, they have to provide the JKS file that will internally have both the public and private keys, and you have to get a corresponding password and upload it. Whereas trust store is something, if you want to enable the mutual TLS context. For example, the domains when there is a HTTP or HTTPS connection is invoked from your source to your API. So it comes to the ingress. So ingress will do the TLS termination using the your certificate, and then also it will validate the client certificates.
Right. Okay. And this section where it say configure DNS, right? Record type. Can you scroll down a bit? Yeah. So, do I have to do any configuration in order to do routing? Like in this configure DNS, do I have to do any setting in this section?
Not required if you don't have DNS, because you are configuring another the DNS server on the, there's an internal DNS server on the private space at this level.
Okay.
Only you have an external DNS, you can do it, but more ideally external DNS is not required if your organization doesn't follow it.
Got it. Can you go to the VPN section where you have created one VPN?
Sure.
Can you go to the connection details once?
One second. One second.
The
Which one you want?
configure VPN, the first step.
One second. Let me create a new one for you. Tell me.
Okay, so when we say remote IP, this is the remote IP of
Your VPN.
my VPN on the
Yes.
CloudHub side.
It should be static and it's a public one. Yep.
So it is on my CloudHub side, right? It is not on
Yeah.
the data center side, right? So this is
It is on the cloud side.
okay,
It says the public IP address of your VPN endpoint.
right? And this local ASN number,
Local ASN is a IP, is a autonomous system number, which is the IP prefixes of your VPN, which is the MuleSoft side of the connection. Okay, and remote ASN is the your corporate network side of the connection.
right? And that
So
number I have to get it from their network team to
yes,
your
yes,
network.
yes, yes, you have to get it. So in case of dynamic, you have to get it. In case of static, your local ASN is enough, but you have to get the static route. So as you asked the initial question, right? So if you have multiple data, how you can do that?
Mhm.
So you can do the comma separated, but you have to ensure whether that corporate set of VPN having connectivity to multiple data center across the regions. Okay, if they don't have region, if they don't have connectivity to other regions, then you have to create a separate VPN for that.
Right, separate VPN for separate data centers.
Exactly.
Okay, and can you go to the next step? The remaining information that I needed from client, which is
So which is the next one? Is one sec. So this is the connection gate, right? So the router they have at their end, right? You have to get the device detail. What is the device vendor? What is the device platform, device software, everything you have to get. Because after selecting this, you have to download the connection gate. You have to share this connection gate to them, and they will configure the VPN at their end. Then only this particular tunnel will be enabled for the connectivity. Is it clear?
yeah. Thanks.
Any more questions?
On the limitation side, Vijay, I heard that Cloud of Cloud of 2.0 only allow HTTP requests. So that is a major limitation, right? It cannot accept in non-HTTP request.
No, it will accept HTTP as well. But recommendation I said is don't allow HTTP requests for your inbound firewall.
I think somewhere in documentation it said non-HTTP is not allowed, I guess. So I was, oh,
1 second. See that would be on the chat space. But ideally, when you go for HTTP, will not be entertained at any point in time. Okay, so we mostly deal with HTTPS.
Okay.
Any more questions?
I think there is one.
Yes, Shubham, is there any questions?
Yeah, I think there's this one question like out of this context. I mean,
Ah,
this
okay. Okay, V core calculation is done for RTF. Okay, first of all, the V core calculation is again it depends on two things. Okay, what sort of licensing you're going for. Okay, so the licensing is by default will provide like two vcore per one, like production and two for non-production, and additional vcore you have to go and do the procurement, and based on that you have to do the capacity planning. So how many use case you're going to develop for the organization, and how you're going to split that down into number of APIs, and how many APIs requires, how many fractions of vcore. So and then is there any additional business group you're going to isolate the private space or VPC, according to the business group. So everything you have to do the considerations and do the planning, and then only you have to suggest on the vcore customization or procurement. Yes, that's right. CloudHub 2.0 for vcore 0.1 provides more memory. I think in the MuleSoft documentation that it provides like additional primary memory they have calculated on the vcore sizing. Yes, and moreover, people are like going for CloudHub 2.0, like
Yep.
they're newly coming into MuleSoft. Only few clients are still running with Cloud 1.0. They're also like trying to look for, and moreover, as far as my experience, the account that I handle, so for the people who do not want to manage infrastructure, they go for cloud up as an iPaaS, or they prefer RTF, and also it's a BYOK, which is build your own Kubernetes, where the infrastructure and the Kubernetes managed, so it's a manager with the customer, only the RTF component is managed by the MuleSoft. If there are no questions, suppose topic is running in before. Okay, 0.2 for memory. Okay, see, exactly, we have to compare, we have to go and get the list of configuration from the MuleSoft document to showcase that, okay, what is the memory they are giving for 0.1 vcore in 1.0 versus 0.2 vcore in 2.0. Okay, I think for the initial there is no big change, but like 0.5 there is a difference in the memory. Okay, so we have to just go with the documentation and see whether it is really benefiting. But on the high level note, yes, there are memory differences provided on the 2.2, but on which particular week or sizing is something you have to check the documentation. Okay, if there is no questions, I will leave the floor to Giri and Shubham for the closing the session.